Our next set of notes focuses on the New England colonies. And the main idea for this section is that religion influenced the settlement and government of the New England colonies. It matters now because what was known as the Puritan work ethic and the religious beliefs present in the New England colonies still influence American culture today. And here, these colonies here are what made up the New England colonies: Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut. Well, the first part that gets the New England colonies started is the Mayflower and the Pilgrims. So the voyage of the Mayflower. The Pilgrims sailed to America because they were not allowed to practice their religion back in England. They went to some other parts in Europe, hoping to have more freedom there. They were unsuccessful. In 1620, they left and decided to settle in Virginia. But they went off course and they started to run out of supplies, so they ended up settling in Plymouth, Massachusetts. To keep order after hearing about some of the failed and struggling colonies further south, they decided to write and sign the Mayflower Compact, which was a set of laws for their colony. And it's significant because it was the first set of laws or constitution written by Europeans in the Americas. So the Pilgrims found Plymouth. By the first spring, just like in Jamestown, half of the Pilgrims died from illness or starvation. Local Native Americans start to trade with the Pilgrims. They teach them how to plant, hunt, and fish. Again, similar to in Jamestown. And those Pilgrims begin to do much better with the help of the Native Americans. The Puritans come to Massachusetts Bay. So Puritans and Pilgrims were different, but they're often seen as somewhat similar. And they had some similar beliefs and similar reasons for leaving England and coming to the Americas. They were also persecuted in England, just like the Pilgrims. They were allowed to practice their religion. So starting in the 1630s, many Puritans began settling in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. When we think of New England, when we talk about the New England colonies, they often talk about the New England way. It was centered around a few things, mainly religion and hard work and structure. Puritans were very strict and they were very deeply religious. They had mandatory church services, and at these mandatory church services, the New England way or hard work was stressed. The hard work of colonists allowed the New England colonies to become very prosperous or very rich. They worked very hard. They were able to make and sell a lot of things, and they did well financially because of this extreme hard work. Challenges to Puritan leaders. So some people who lived in New England thought that the Puritan leaders were too strict. They said, we came to New England for religious freedom, but we're not allowed to practice. Well, religious freedom in New England only exists for those that are Puritans. If you're not Puritan or don't follow the same strict beliefs as Puritans, then you don't have the same amount of religious freedom. So one man who challenged Puritan leaders was named Roger Williams. He started the colony of Rhode Island in 1636, hoping for greater freedom. Greater religious freedom, more open religious freedom. In 1638, Anne Hutchinson left New England and she went to Rhode Island. Women were not allowed a prominent role in Puritan society, and Anne Hutchinson thought that women should have a greater voice and a greater role. Both Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams believed that church attendance should not be mandatory, that if people want to worship in their own home, they should, that if people want to choose not to attend church for any number of personal reasons, they should not be forced to. Many who agreed with them left Massachusetts and came to Rhode Island looking for a more open colony, a colony where you could practice religions of your choice more freely. At the same time, they're having these religious tensions in New England. There's also something going on called King Philip's War. So similar to what we saw in Jamestown, settlers begin to take Native American land, and there's violence in response to that. King Philip was not the Native Americans' actual Native American name, but he was a leader of a Native American alliance, and it was the name that the Europeans gave him. King Philip's War was a year-long war between the colonists and a Native American alliance of different tribes working together. New England, commerce and religion. Main idea of this section is that fishing and trade were really, really important to the prosperity and growth of the New England colonies. It matters now because coastal cities in New England continue to engage in trade, some of the same trade that started during the colonial time period. Okay, so we've been talking about New England specifically right now, but it's important to know that by the 1700s there were 4 different colonial regions that had developed. It was the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, the Southern colonies, and the backcountry. And here this key shows which colonies were part of which region. So we see North Carolina as part of the Southern colonies, my home state of New York here, St. Pink, part of the Middle colonies. We talked about Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Connecticut being part of the New England colonies already. Okay, so back to New England. Farms and towns of New England. Most New Englanders lived in towns that were on land that was bought and owned by the church. So the church was the center of town, and the center of life in town revolved around the church. Many families practiced what's called subsistence farming. They grew just enough food to live on and grew a little bit extra to sell in town. The soil wasn't good enough in New England to grow large amounts of crops or cash crops, but you could grow enough for your family to live on. So since the soil wasn't very good, New Englanders harvested the seed. Said New England soil was not very good for farming, so colonies make their money through shipbuilding, fishing, and trade. And here this map shows the New England colonies, and it shows the different products that they sold to become rich. So we see rum, shipbuilding. There was a lot of timber. Had tar to make pitch for the ships. A little bit of iron. Cattle is fairly common. Here's another big one, furs, especially fur from beavers. Beaver pelts. Whaling was a major industry. For a long time, whale oil was burned for lamps and street lamps and in houses. We mentioned lumber, and fishing was another major industry in the New England colonies. The Atlantic trade, so the triangular trade, comes about from the Columbian Exchange, which we'll spend more time talking about in a separate lesson. But the triangular trade brings goods from Europe to Africa to the Americas. So to start the triangular trade, navigation acts were passed, which we've talked about before, or which we will talk about more later when we talk about some problems in North Carolina specifically. The Navigation Acts were laws passed by the English government to make sure that it made money from the colonies' trade, basically. A lot of colonists, though, didn't want to pay those taxes, so they smuggled or imported and exported goods illegally. African Americans in New England. So African Americans were not very prominent, not very prevalent in New England. Slavery was not economical in New England. So New England didn't have a lot of slaves. And they didn't do so because New Englanders were better people than people that lived in the middle colonies or the southern colonies. They did it because they didn't have slaves because they couldn't make a lot of money off slaves. Some wealthy merchants did own slaves. So the New Englanders that did have slaves often treated them better than the southern colonies, but they were still slaves. So even better than one place is still not good. Some wealthy merchants had slaves, and they often let slaves keep part of their wages and eventually buy their freedom. A positive for New England was that it was home to more free African Americans than any other region. One, because some slaves were able to buy their freedom, and two, because later when slaves started escaping the southern colonies, if they made it to New England, they were often allowed to retain their freedom after escaping the South. Okay, that's where we're going to stop for today. Next, we'll look at the middle colonies with a little bit of the southern colonies, and then the fourth presentation will focus on the southern colonies and the backcountry.